Wyatt Holloway's soul shattered as his loyal stallion Silver collapsed in the desert sand, the deadly rattlesnake venom already causing the magnificent white horse to tremble and foam at the mouth. With tears streaming down his weathered face for the first time in years, the desperate cowboy looked up to find an Apache woman standing before him in the fading light, her calm voice cutting through his despair. "I have a remedy." Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The merciless Arizona sun beat down on Wyatt Holloway's shoulders as he guided his white stallion, Silver, across the vast expanse of the Sonoran Desert. 3 days into his journey from Tucson to the small settlement of Bitter Springs, Wyatt had seen nothing but sand, rock, and endless sky. His supplies were running low, and the lonely howl of coyotes had been his only company through the cold desert nights. But he had Silver, the most loyal companion a man could ask for, and that was enough. Wyatt had purchased Silver 4 years ago from a horse trader in Santa Fe. The stallion was wild-eyed and unbroken then, a magnificent beast with a spirit that matched the untamed frontier. Most men would have considered him too much trouble, but Wyatt saw something in those fierce eyes, a kindred spirit perhaps. Over the years, they'd survived blizzards, outlaws, and the unforgiving wilderness together. Silver wasn't just a horse. He was family. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the desert floor, Wyatt spotted a cluster of rock formations that would provide shelter for the night. "What do you say, boy?" he murmured, patting Silver's neck. "Let's make camp before it gets dark." The stallion's ears twitched in response, and Wyatt guided him toward the rocky outcropping. It was a good spot, defensible, with a small overhang that would provide some protection if the weather turned. Wyatt dismounted and began to unsaddle Silver, his movements practiced and efficient after years on the trail. "You've earned your rest," Wyatt said, running his hand along Silver's flank. The horse was dusty from the day's ride, but still magnificent, coat gleaming like polished pearl in the fading light. Wyatt had always taken pride in caring for his mount, ensuring Silver was fed and watered before he tended to his own needs. That's how it was in the West. A man's horse often meant the difference between life and death. As Wyatt gathered kindling for a small fire, Silver grazed nearby on the sparse desert vegetation. The evening was quiet, save for the occasional call of a desert bird and the soft sound of the horse's movements. Wyatt had grown accustomed to the silence out here, had even come to appreciate it. In town, there was always noise, drunken shouts from saloons, the constant bustle of people. Out here, a man could hear himself think. Wyatt had just gotten a small fire going when Silver let out a sudden pained whinny. The sound sent ice through Wyatt's veins. It wasn't the normal noise of a content horse, but one of distress. He whipped around to see Silver stamping nervously, head tossing. "Easy, boy," Wyatt called, rising to his feet. That's when he saw it, a rattlesnake, coiled and angry, its warning rattle filling the evening air. Before Wyatt could react, the snake struck, its fangs sinking into Silver's front leg. "No!" Wyatt shouted, drawing his revolver and firing in one fluid motion. The snake's body jerked as the bullet found its mark, but the damage was already done. Silver reared in pain, nearly trampling the dead snake before staggering sideways. Wyatt holstered his gun and rushed to his horse, heart hammering against his ribs. "Easy, Silver, easy," he soothed, grabbing the reins to steady the panicking animal. Silver's eyes rolled wildly, showing white around the edges, and foam was already beginning to fleck his muzzle. Snake venom worked fast, especially in the heat. Wyatt had seen it before, had watched good horses die in agony from rattler bites. The thought of losing Silver sent a cold wave of fear through him, unlike anything he'd felt facing down armed men. "You're gonna be all right, boy," Wyatt said, his voice thick with emotion as he examined the bite. Two distinct puncture wounds marked Silver's leg, already swelling rapidly. Wyatt knew what he should do: lance the wound, try to suck out the venom. But panic clawed at his mind, making it hard to think clearly. This wasn't just any horse, this was Silver. As if sensing Wyatt's distress, Silver nickered softly, nuzzling against his shoulder. The gesture broke something inside Wyatt. In all his years riding the frontier, facing danger and death with steely resolve, he'd never felt so helpless. "Don't you die on me," he whispered fiercely, wrapping his arms around Silver's neck. "You hear me? Don't you dare die." But Silver's breathing was already becoming labored, his magnificent body trembling with pain and the effects of the venom. The stallion's legs buckled, and he sank to his knees on the desert sand, unable to support his own weight. Wyatt knelt beside him, one hand stroking Silver's neck while the other frantically tried to keep pressure off the wounded leg. Tears, foreign and unwelcome, burned Wyatt's eyes. Out here, a man learned to swallow his emotions, to harden himself against the constant threat of loss. But watching Silver suffer broke through those carefully constructed barriers. "Please," Wyatt whispered, though to whom he was praying, he couldn't say. He'd abandoned formal religion years ago, finding little use for it in the harsh realities of frontier life. But now, facing the loss of his closest companion, he found himself bargaining with whatever powers might be listening. The sound of approaching footsteps made Wyatt's hand instinctively move to his gun. He looked up, blinking away tears, to see a woman standing a few yards away. She was Apache, dressed in a simple buckskin dress adorned with intricate beadwork, her long black hair falling in two braids over her shoulders. She stood with quiet dignity, observing the scene before her with careful, intelligent eyes. Under normal circumstances, Wyatt would have been on high alert. Relations between settlers and the Apache were strained at best, deadly at worst. But with Silver dying before his eyes, caution took a distant second to desperation. "Snake," he said simply, gesturing to the dead rattler, and then to Silver's leg. The woman stepped closer, seemingly unafraid of the armed white man or his distressed horse. She knelt on the opposite side of Silver, her movements graceful and controlled. With gentle hands, she examined the bite, then Silver's eyes and mouth, assessing his condition with practiced efficiency. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and melodic, her English accented but clear. "I have a remedy," she said, meeting Wyatt's gaze across Silver's heaving body. "If you trust me." Wyatt hesitated only for a moment. Silver let out another pained sound, his proud head now lying weakly on the desert floor. What choice did he have? "Please," he said, this time addressing the woman directly. "He's all I have." The woman nodded once, understanding passing between them. Without another word, she rose and disappeared into the gathering darkness beyond the firelight. Wyatt remained by Silver's side, one hand continuously stroking the horse's neck, whispering encouragement though his throat felt raw with unshed tears. "Hold on, boy," he murmured. "Help's coming. You just hold on." As the stars began to emerge in the vast desert sky, Wyatt Holloway, a man who had faced down gunslingers and outlaws without flinching, wept silently beside his fallen horse, waiting for an Apache woman he didn't know to return with a remedy he couldn't imagine, but desperately wanted to believe in. The Apache woman returned within minutes, her arms laden with various plants and a small clay pot hanging from a leather strap around her shoulder. Wyatt watched as she knelt beside Silver, setting her gathered materials on the ground with methodical care. The stallion's breathing had grown increasingly labored, his magnificent body shuddering with each painful inhale. "My name is Najoni," she said without looking up, her fingers efficiently sorting through the plants she'd collected. "It means beautiful in my language." "Wyatt Holloway," he responded, his voice rough with emotion. "Can you save him?" Najoni's eyes met his briefly. The snake's poison is strong, but so is my medicine. I make no promises, but I will try. She worked swiftly, crushing particular leaves between smooth river stones she'd pulled from the clay pot. Her movements were practiced and precise, suggesting years of knowledge passed down through generations. Wyatt watched in desperate hope as she mixed the crushed plants with water from her own water skin, creating a thick green paste. "Hold him steady," she instructed. "This will cause pain before it brings healing." Wyatt positioned himself at Silver's head, whispering soothing words into the horse's ear while firmly holding him in place. Najoni examined the bite area again, then pulled a small sharp bone knife from her belt. Before Wyatt could protest, she made 2 quick, clean incisions around the fang marks. Silver jerked violently, a pained whinny escaping his mouth. Wyatt tightened his grip, continuing his stream of reassurances, though his heart ached at causing his companion more suffering. "The poison must be drawn out," Najoni explained, pressing the edges of the wound to encourage bleeding. "Then we can combat what has already entered his blood." She worked methodically, first cleaning the wound, then applying her herbal paste directly to the incisions. The mixture had a pungent, earthy smell that reminded Wyatt of rain-soaked prairie. Next, she pulled several dried roots from her collection, placing them in her mouth to chew until they formed a pulp. This, too, she applied to Silver's wound before binding the leg with strips of cloth she tore from the hem of her dress. "Now we wait," she said, sitting back on her heels, "and we pray to the Creator that your horse is strong enough to fight." Wyatt nodded, still stroking Silver's neck. "He's the strongest horse I've ever known." They fell into silence as the fire crackled beside them, casting dancing shadows across Silver's white coat. After several minutes, Najoni rose and approached Wyatt's saddlebags, which lay nearby. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward them. Wyatt nodded, too focused on Silver to question her intentions. She rummaged briefly before finding a small metal pot, which she filled with water from her skin and placed over the fire. Into this, she added more of her collected plants, different ones this time with small yellow flowers. "A tea," she explained, noticing Wyatt's questioning look. "For when he can drink, it will help cleanse his blood." As she worked, Wyatt found his curiosity overcoming his worry, if only momentarily. "What brings you out here alone?" he asked. "This isn't exactly safe country for anyone, especially a woman by herself." Najoni's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in her dark eyes, a shadow of remembered pain, perhaps. "I am returning to my people," she said simply. "I was away for many seasons." There was more to that story, Wyatt could tell, but he didn't press. Everyone in these territories had histories they preferred not to share. The West had a way of collecting broken people, of offering them open spaces in which to reinvent themselves, or at least to outrun their pasts. "And you?" she asked, stirring the brewing tea. Where does Wyatt Holloway ride to with such urgency that he pushes his horse through the hottest part of the day? Wyatt's jaw tightened. He hadn't realized she'd been observing him before making herself known. "Bitter Springs," he answered. "Got business there that won't wait." What business makes a man risk his most valuable possession? Her question struck a nerve. Wyatt had indeed pushed Silver harder than he should have, driven by his need to reach Bitter Springs before the new moon. Now his haste might cost his loyal companion his life. "My brother," he admitted after a long pause. "Word came that he's in trouble. Bad trouble." Najoni nodded, accepting his answer without further questions. She moved back to Silver's side, checking his breathing and the bandaged wound. "The swelling has not worsened," she observed. "This is good." Hope flickered in Wyatt's chest. So he might make it. "It is too soon to know," she cautioned, "but he fights." I can feel his spirit pushing against the darkness. As if in response to her words, Silver stirred slightly, his tail swishing weakly against the desert floor. Wyatt felt a surge of emotion so powerful, it nearly overwhelmed him. "Thank you," he managed to say, the words wholly inadequate for the gratitude he felt. Nijoni acknowledged his thanks with a slight nod. "I have known horses like yours, rare creatures who carry more heart than their bodies should hold." She reached out to touch Silver's muzzle gently. "My father raised such animals before the soldiers came." The simple statement contained volumes of unspoken history. Wyatt knew enough about the conflicts between the Army and the Apache tribes to fill in some of the blanks. "I'm sorry," he said, knowing these words, too, were inadequate. "It was many seasons ago," she replied, though her voice suggested the wounds remained fresh. "I was taken to the mission school after. That is where I learned your language and your medicine. I combined it with the knowledge of my grandmothers." The tea was boiling now. Nijoni removed it from the fire and set it aside to cool, then returned to monitoring Silver. The horse's breathing seemed slightly less labored, though Wyatt couldn't be sure if this was improvement or simply wishful thinking. "If he survives until morning," Nijoni said, "his chances improve greatly." The night deepened around them. Wyatt added wood to the fire, creating a protective circle of light against the vast darkness of the desert. Neither he nor Nijoni spoke much, both focused on Silver's condition, watching for any change, good or bad. Every half hour, Nijoni checked the bandage and applied more of her herbal paste. Twice, she managed to get Silver to swallow some of her medicinal tea, gently lifting his head and pouring small amounts into his mouth. Around midnight, Silver's condition worsened suddenly. His breathing became shallow and rapid, his body trembling violently. Wyatt felt panic rise in his throat as he looked to Nijoni for guidance. "The poison has reached his heart," she said, her voice tight with concern. "This is the moment of greatest danger." She reached into her clay pot and withdrew a small leather pouch. From this, she extracted a pinch of dark, powdery substance. "What is that?" Wyatt asked, his protective instincts flaring despite his desperation. "The last of my grandmother's medicine," Nijoni replied, "made from the bark of a tree that grows only in the high mountains. It strengthens the heart when death comes knocking." She mixed the powder with the last of her tea and, with Wyatt's help, managed to get Silver to swallow it. Then they waited, the desert night pressing in around them, silent witness to their vigil over a dying horse. The hours crawled by like wounded animals. Wyatt's back ached from maintaining his position beside Silver, but he refused to move. Every labored breath the stallion took seemed like it might be his last, each one a small victory against the venom coursing through his veins. Nijoni maintained her vigil opposite Wyatt, occasionally checking Silver's pulse or adjusting the poultice on his wounded leg. The fire had burned low, casting just enough light to illuminate Silver's white coat and Nijoni's watchful face. Against the vast darkness of the desert, they were a small island of life, fragile and determined. "Tell me about him," Nijoni said suddenly, breaking the long silence. Wyatt looked up, momentarily confused. "Silver?" She nodded. "A horse is more than just an animal to a man like you. He has a story." Wyatt's hand continued its rhythmic stroking of Silver's neck, drawing comfort from the familiar feel of the stallion's coat. He wasn't one for sharing personal stories, but somehow in this strange night vigil with a woman he'd just met, the usual barriers seemed less important. "Bought him off a horse trader in Santa Fe," he began, his voice low in the quiet night. "Fellow claimed he was unbreakable, said he'd thrown every man who tried to ride him." Nijoni's mouth curved slightly. "And you took that as a challenge?" "I guess I did," Wyatt admitted, a ghost of a smile touching his lips at the memory. First time I got on his back, he bucked me so hard I saw stars for 2 days. Second time wasn't much better. But you kept trying. Something about him. Wyatt's gaze drifted down to Silver's face, noting the proud lines even in his weakened state. Most men break a horse by breaking its spirit. I didn't want to do that with him. He deserved better. As if hearing his words, Silver's ear twitched slightly, and Wyatt felt his heart leap with hope. "How did you succeed where others failed?" Najoni asked, her eyes never leaving her patient. "Patience, respect." Wyatt shrugged. "Took me 3 months to fully gain his trust. We came to an understanding. I wouldn't try to break him if he'd agree to carry me." Najoni nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "My people say that a horse chooses its rider as much as a rider chooses his horse. The greatest partnerships are those built on mutual choice." Silver's breathing shifted, becoming slightly more regular. Both humans tensed, watching for any sign that would tell them which way the battle was turning. "And you?" Wyatt asked after a moment. "You said you were returning to your people. Where have you been all this time?" Najoni's expression remained carefully neutral, but her hands stilled momentarily in their work. "The white man's school, as I told you. Then I was a nurse at Fort Bowie for 3 seasons. A nurse? Wyatt hadn't expected that. How'd that come about? "The mission teachers saw I had skill with medicine. They sent me to learn more." Her voice held no emotion, but Wyatt sensed depths beneath the simple explanation. "I learned your doctors' ways, their medicines. Some were good, some were not. And now you're going home." It wasn't a question, but Najoni nodded anyway. "My grandmother is dying. She sent word through traders. I must return before she joins our ancestors." She checked Silver's bandage again, her movements gentle but efficient. "She is the one who taught me the old ways of healing, what I am using now to save your horse. Seems like I owe your grandmother a debt then," Wyatt said quietly. Najoni met his eyes across Silver's body. "If he lives, you will owe the Creator, not me or my grandmother. We are only the hands through which healing flows." They lapsed into silence again, each lost in their own thoughts as the desert night deepened around them. The stars wheeled overhead, cold and distant, while coyotes called to one another from the rocky ridges. Sometime later, Wyatt couldn't have said exactly when, he noticed a subtle change in Silver. The horse's breathing had eased, becoming deeper and more regular. The trembling had stopped. Hope, cautious but persistent, bloomed in Wyatt's chest. "I think he's improving," he whispered, afraid to speak too loudly and somehow jinx the progress. Najoni leaned forward, placing her hand on Silver's neck, then checking his gums and eyes. "The fever is less," she confirmed, "and his heart beats stronger. Your horse fights hard to stay in this world." Relief washed over Wyatt like a cool desert rain. "Will he make it?" "It is still too soon to promise," Najoni cautioned. "But yes, I believe he may live." For the first time since Silver's collapse, Wyatt allowed himself to truly believe that his companion might survive. The realization hit him with surprising force, and he found himself having to blink back tears for the second time that night. He wasn't a man accustomed to such displays of emotion, and the unfamiliar vulnerability left him feeling exposed. "I don't know how to thank you," he said roughly, pushing past the tightness in his throat. Najoni regarded him steadily. "There is no debt between us. Our paths crossed when both needed assistance. This is the way of life." "Still," Wyatt insisted, "if there's ever anything you need—" "Perhaps there is one thing," she interrupted, her expression thoughtful. "Bitter Springs is on the way to my people's territory. If your horse recovers enough to travel, I would appreciate the protection of riding with you." Wyatt hesitated only briefly. Under normal circumstances, he preferred to travel alone. The mission he was on to help his brother was potentially dangerous, and involving others, especially a woman, went against his better judgment. But after what Nijoni had done for Silver, how could he refuse? Of course, he agreed, though I should warn you the business I have there might not be entirely peaceful. A hint of a smile touched Nijoni's lips. I did not imagine you were traveling so urgently to attend a church social, Wyatt Holloway. The use of his full name, spoken in her accented English, sounded almost musical. Wyatt found himself returning her smile despite the gravity of their situation. Fair enough, then we have a deal. Dawn was approaching, the eastern sky beginning to lighten almost imperceptibly. Silver's condition continued to improve gradually as the night surrendered to morning. Wyatt finally allowed himself to shift position, stretching his cramped muscles while maintaining a protective hand on his horse. You should rest, Nijoni suggested. I will watch him. Wyatt shook his head. I'll rest when I know he's out of danger. Stubborn like your horse, she observed, but there was no criticism in her tone. Then we will watch together. As the sun crested the eastern horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber, Silver attempted to rise. The movement was weak and unsteady, but it sent a surge of hope through Wyatt's chest. Easy, boy, he soothed, placing a steadying hand on the stallion's neck. Don't push yourself too hard. Nijoni was instantly alert, examining Silver's eyes and the wound on his leg. This is good, she pronounced. Very good. His body is fighting off the poison. Silver managed to lift his head, his intelligent eyes finding Wyatt's face. The recognition there, the trust, nearly undid Wyatt completely. He ran a hand along Silver's jaw, words failing him in the face of his relief. He needs water, Nijoni said. And if he will eat, that would be even better. Together they helped the weakened horse drink from Wyatt's canteen, Silver taking small, tentative sips at first, then drinking more eagerly. Afterwards, Nijoni checked the bandage on his leg, nodding with satisfaction at what she found. The swelling has gone down considerably, she reported. I will apply fresh medicine and let the wound breathe a little. As she worked, carefully removing the old bandage and cleaning the wound, Wyatt moved to gather more firewood. The morning was cool, but the desert sun would soon turn merciless. Silver would need shade and rest if he was to continue recovering. When Wyatt returned with an armload of scrubby brush and deadwood, Nijoni was feeding Silver small handfuls of dried grasses she'd collected from around their camp. He eats, she said, a note of triumph in her voice. This is the strongest sign yet that he will recover. Relief washed over Wyatt in waves. He dropped the firewood and knelt beside Silver, who nickered softly in greeting. Thank you, Wyatt said to Nijoni, the words wholly inadequate for what he felt. I don't know what I would have done if... No need to speak of what did not come to pass, she interrupted gently. He lives. That is what matters now. They spent the day tending to Silver, creating a shelter of blankets stretched between rocks to shield him from the sun, encouraging him to drink and eat small amounts. By mid-afternoon, the stallion was able to stand, though shakily, and Wyatt felt a knot of tension release in his chest that he hadn't even realized was there. As the day wore on, they spoke little, falling into an easy rhythm of caring for Silver and maintaining their small camp. Nijoni seemed comfortable with silence in a way few people Wyatt had encountered were. There was no need to fill the air with idle chatter, no awkwardness in the quiet that stretched between them. It wasn't until evening, as they sat beside the fire eating a simple meal of jerky and hardtack from Wyatt's provisions, that Nijoni broke the companionable silence. Your brother, she said. The one in trouble. Will you tell me about him? Wyatt stared into the flames, considering how much to share. He'd spent so long keeping his past locked away, that opening up didn't come naturally, but something about this woman, her quiet strength, her acceptance, made him want to try. "His name is Samuel," he said finally. "Younger than me by 4 years. Always had a gift for finding trouble. And what trouble has found him now?" Najoni asked, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. Wyatt sighed, running a hand through his dust-streaked hair. "Got a letter about 2 weeks back. Sam's gotten himself mixed up with some bad men in Bitter Springs. Says he owes them money, a lot of money, and they're not the patient type. Gambling debts? Among other things." Wyatt's mouth twisted. Sam never could resist a game of chance or a pretty face. Combination of the two is usually what lands him in hot water. Najoni nodded, absorbing this information. "And you ride to rescue him?" It wasn't a question, but Wyatt answered anyway. "He's my brother, only family I got left." Even though this is not the first time, her perception was unnerving. "No," Wyatt admitted. "Not the first time. Probably won't be the last either. Yet you go anyway." Wyatt poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the darkening sky. "What else can I do? Leave him to die?" Najoni was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful as she gazed into the flames. "Among my people, we believe the Creator places certain souls in our path, souls we are bound to through many lifetimes. These bonds cannot be easily broken, even when they bring us pain." "You believe that? About souls traveling together?" Wyatt wasn't normally one for philosophical discussions, but something about her words resonated with him. "I have seen enough of life to believe there are connections that run deeper than we understand." She looked over at Silver, who was resting comfortably nearby. Like the connection between a man and his horse. Wyatt followed her gaze, warmth blooming in his chest at the sight of Silver's steady breathing. "I just know I can't abandon him. Either of them." "No," she agreed softly. "You cannot. It is not your nature." They fell silent again, the crackling of the fire and the gentle desert breeze the only sounds in the gathering darkness. Silver had managed to eat more as the day progressed, and the wound on his leg showed clear signs of healing. Wyatt knew they wouldn't be able to travel tomorrow. The horse was still too weak. But perhaps the day after, if the improvement continued. "And your grandmother," Wyatt said eventually. "You're certain she's still waiting for you?" A shadow passed over Najoni's face. "No, I am not certain. It has been many weeks since the message came, but I must try to reach her." "What will you do after, I mean?" Wyatt wasn't sure why he asked, only that he found himself genuinely curious about this woman's path. Najoni's eyes remained fixed on the fire. "I will stay with my people. There is much healing needed among them, not just of the body." There was a weight to her words that Wyatt could feel but not fully understand. He knew enough about the wars between the Army and the Apache tribes to recognize the vast gulf of experience that separated them, despite their current companionable silence. "The soldiers at the fort," he began carefully, "did they treat you well?" "Some did," she replied, her voice neutral. "Others, less so. I learned much about the white man's world during those years. Some lessons were harder than others." Wyatt nodded, not pressing further. He'd seen enough of how the Army dealt with Indian affairs to have a good idea of what she might have endured. "Well," he said, awkwardly changing the subject, "if Silver keeps improving like this, we should be able to head for Bitter Springs day after tomorrow. Might have to take it slow at first." "That would be wise," Najoni agreed, accepting the shift in conversation. "The poison has weakened him, but his spirit is strong. With proper care, he will recover fully." 2 days passed in the shadow of the rock formation, each bringing marked improvement in Silver's condition. By the morning of the third day, the stallion was able to bear weight on the injured leg without trembling, and the swelling had reduced to almost nothing. The wound itself was healing cleanly, with no sign of the angry red infection that often followed snake bites. "Your medicine works wonders," Wyatt observed as he and Najoni watched Silver cautiously testing his strength, taking a few experimental steps around their small camp. "It is not only the medicine," Najoni replied, satisfaction evident in her voice. "His will to live is strong. Some horses would have surrendered to the darkness." "Not Silver," Wyatt said with quiet pride. "He's too stubborn." "Like his master," she remarked, the hint of a smile playing at her lips. Wyatt found himself smiling in return, an expression that had become more frequent during their days together. There was something about Najoni's calm presence that eased the constant vigilance he normally maintained. She was observant, but never intrusive, helpful without being overbearing. In the small, intimate world of their desert camp, they had developed a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. "Think he's ready to travel?" Wyatt asked, nodding toward Silver. Najoni considered the horse thoughtfully. "Not at full speed, but yes, he can travel. We will need to stop often and watch that the wound does not reopen." Wyatt nodded, relieved at her assessment. His concern for Sam hadn't diminished during their forced delay, but he'd known pushing Silver too soon would only end in disaster. Patience, as difficult as it was, had been their only option. "We'll leave at first light tomorrow," he decided. "Should reach Bitter Springs in 3 days if we take it slow." As they prepared for departure, checking supplies, mending tack, planning their route, Wyatt found himself watching Najoni when she wasn't looking. Her movements were graceful and efficient, her hands sure in whatever task they undertook. More than once, he caught himself wondering about her life before their paths crossed, the experiences that had shaped her into the woman who moved so confidently through the harsh desert landscape. That evening, as they shared the last of Wyatt's coffee by the fire, Najoni unexpectedly broke the companionable silence. "There will be those in Bitter Springs who will not welcome my presence," she said, her voice matter-of-fact. Wyatt's hand stilled in the act of pouring the bitter brew. "Because you're Apache." She nodded once, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "The wars may be over on paper, but not in people's hearts." Wyatt couldn't deny it. The decades of brutal conflict between settlers and the Apache had left deep scars on both sides. Even now, with most of the tribes confined to reservations, fear and hatred ran strong in many frontier towns. "You'll be under my protection," he said firmly. "Anyone who has a problem with you will have a problem with me." Najoni regarded him steadily across the fire. "And that could complicate your business with your brother." She was right, of course. Showing up in a place like Bitter Springs with an Apache woman would draw attention, the kind of attention Wyatt typically avoided. His mission to help Sam required discretion, not controversy. "Doesn't matter," he said after a moment. "You saved Silver. That puts you firmly on my side of the ledger." Something flickered in Najoni's expression, surprise perhaps, or a deeper emotion Wyatt couldn't name. "Most white men would not see it that way," she observed. "I'm not most men." "No," she agreed quietly. "You are not." Their eyes held across the fire, and Wyatt felt something shift between them, a recognition of the unusual alliance they had formed, bridging worlds that rarely met in peace. The moment was broken when Silver whickered softly from where he rested nearby. Both humans turned to look at the horse, who was watching them with what Wyatt could have sworn was knowing interest. "Even your horse agrees," Najoni said, amusement coloring her voice. Wyatt chuckled, grateful for the lightened mood. Silver's a good judge of character, always has been. They fell back into comfortable silence as the fire burned low and the stars wheeled overhead. Tomorrow would bring a return to the outside world, with all its complications and dangers, But tonight, in this small circle of firelight, there was only peace. Dawn found them ready to travel, their few possessions packed efficiently. Silver stood nearby, his white coat gleaming in the early morning light. Though he still favored his injured leg slightly, he looked remarkably recovered, a far cry from the dying animal of 3 nights ago. "I'll walk for the first few hours," Wyatt said, adjusting Silver's saddle. "Give him a chance to get his strength back." Nijoni nodded in agreement. "Wise. I will walk with you." Wyatt helped her secure her small bundle of belongings behind Silver's saddle, then loaded his own saddlebags. They would need to be careful with their water. The route to Bitter Springs crossed some of the driest terrain in the territory. As the sun climbed higher, they set out, Wyatt leading Silver by the reins, with Nijoni walking beside them. The stallion moved willingly, his stride growing more confident with each passing mile. By midday, when they stopped in the meager shade of a stunted mesquite tree, Wyatt was satisfied that Silver was well enough for him to ride, at least for short stretches. "We'll take turns," he told Nijoni. "Neither of us is too heavy for him, and it'll give him rest between riders." She nodded, accepting his judgment without argument. "The wound looks clean," she reported after examining Silver's leg. "No fresh bleeding." They continued their journey through the afternoon, alternating between riding and walking, always keeping Silver's welfare at the forefront of their minds. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they found another suitable campsite, a shallow depression flanked by rocky outcroppings that would provide some protection from the night winds. Wyatt busied himself with setting up camp while Nijoni tended to Silver, applying more of her herbal poultice to his wound. The easy division of labor felt natural, as if they had traveled together for years rather than days. As twilight settled over the desert, painting the landscape in purples and deep blues, Wyatt found himself watching Nijoni again. She sat cross-legged near the small fire he had built, grinding something in a small stone mortar. More medicine for Silver, he assumed. Her face was serene in concentration, her long braids falling forward over her shoulders as she worked. Something tightened in Wyatt's chest at the sight, a feeling he couldn't quite name but that made him both uneasy and strangely at peace. It had been a long time since he'd allowed anyone close enough to matter, yet somehow this woman had slipped past his defenses in the space of a few days. "Tomorrow we will reach the trading post at Coyote Wash," Nijoni said without looking up from her work. "It will be the first test of how people react to our traveling together." Wyatt had visited Coyote Wash trading post twice before in his travels. It wasn't much, a squat adobe building with a corral and water tank sitting at the junction of 2 rarely used trails. The owner, a grizzled former prospector named Harlan, supplemented his meager trading income by selling watered-down whiskey to travelers and occasional bands of cowboys moving cattle through the territory. As they approached the trading post around midday, Wyatt felt Nijoni tense beside him. Silver was doing well enough that they had both walked most of the morning, saving the horse's strength. "We don't have to stop," Wyatt offered, noting her apprehension. "We have enough supplies to make it to Bitter Springs." Nijoni shook her head. "No, we need fresh water, and your horse should rest in shade. Besides," she added with a hint of dry humor, "I cannot avoid white settlements forever." Wyatt nodded, respecting her resolve. "Stay close to me," he said simply. The trading post appeared deserted at first glance, but as they drew closer, Wyatt spotted 3 horses hitched outside, trail-worn animals that spoke of hard riding and harder men. His hand instinctively moved closer to his revolver. Years on the frontier had taught him to be wary of strangers, especially in isolated locations like this. A bell jingled as they entered the dim interior of the trading post. The smell hit them immediately, a pungent mixture of tobacco, sweat, leather, and the sour reek of cheap alcohol. 3 men stood at the rough-hewn counter, deep in conversation with Harlan. All turned at the sound of the bell. The silence was immediate and thick with tension. Wyatt felt rather than saw Najoni draw slightly closer to his side. "Holloway," Harlan greeted him with a nod, recognition dawning in his rheumy eyes. "Been a while." "Harlan," Wyatt returned evenly, his gaze sweeping over the three strangers. They were typical frontier rough riders, unshaven, trail-dusty, with hard eyes that had seen too much and consciences that had seen too little. The oldest of them, a man with a jagged scar running from his left eye to the corner of his mouth, was staring openly at Najoni. "Didn't know you'd taken up with Injuns," the scarred man drawled, spitting a stream of tobacco juice onto the packed earth floor. Wyatt felt his jaw tighten. "Didn't know it was any of your business," he replied, his voice deceptively calm. The man's companions shifted slightly, hands drifting toward their weapons. The atmosphere in the small trading post crackled with dangerous energy. Now, Harlan interjected, clearly anxious to avoid bloodshed in his establishment. "Everyone's welcome to trade here long as they got money or goods worth bartering." "We need water and shade for the horse," Wyatt said, addressing Harlan but keeping his eyes on the three men, "and whatever fresh supplies you have." Harlan nodded, visibly relieved at the shift toward business. "Water tanks out back. 50 cents to fill your canteens, another 50 for your horse to drink his fill and rest in the corral." "Steep prices," Wyatt commented, but he reached for his money pouch nonetheless. "Everything's steep in the desert," Harlan shrugged. As Wyatt counted out the coins, the scarred man moved closer to Najoni, looking her up and down with undisguised interest. "What's your name, squaw?" he asked, his voice carrying a note that made Wyatt's hand instinctively move to his gun. Najoni met the man's gaze without flinching. "My name is not for you to know," she replied, her voice calm but edged with steel. The man's face darkened with anger. "Uppity for an Injun," he growled. "Someone ought to teach you. That's enough." Wyatt's voice cut through the tension like a knife. He hadn't drawn his gun, but his stance had shifted subtly, ready for whatever might come. "The lady's with me. Any problem you have with her, you have with me." The scarred man's hand hovered near his pistol. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the oldest of his companions, a lean, weathered man with a graying beard, placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Let it be, Rollins," he said quietly. "Ain't worth dying over." Rollins hesitated, clearly torn between his anger and his survival instincts. Finally, he spat again and turned away. "Shame to see a white man gone native," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Sleeping with savages." Wyatt's hand twitched toward his gun, but Najoni's light touch on his arm stopped him. Their eyes met briefly, hers conveying a silent message. Not worth it. With visible effort, Wyatt turned his attention back to Harlan. "We'll take some jerky if you have it, and coffee." The trader nodded, grateful for the diffusing of tension, and busied himself gathering the requested supplies. Wyatt paid, and they left the trading post with their purchases, feeling the hard stares of the three men following them. Outside, Wyatt led Silver to the water tank, keeping a wary eye on the trading post door. "I'm sorry about that," he said quietly to Najoni. "It is not your doing," she replied, helping to remove Silver's saddle so the horse could rest more comfortably. "Such encounters are familiar to me." The resignation in her voice bothered Wyatt more than he expected. "Shouldn't be that way." "Yet it is." She stroked Silver's neck as the stallion drank deeply from the tank. "The world is what it is, not what we wish it to be." They fell silent as they tended to Silver and refilled their canteens. Wyatt found himself glancing frequently at the trading post, half expecting the three men to emerge looking for trouble, but the adobe building remained quiet. the only movement the occasional fluttering of the faded canvas awning in the desert breeze. "Those men," Najoni said eventually. "They were not ordinary travelers." Wyatt looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" "They're horses," she explained. "They bore the marks of hard riding, not the usual journey of traders or settlers, and their weapons were well used." Wyatt had noticed the same details, but was impressed that she had too. Outlaws, maybe, or hired guns. Heading toward Bitter Springs? Could be. The thought settled uneasily in Wyatt's gut. If men like that were headed to the same destination as they were, it might complicate the already difficult situation with Sam. They rested for an hour in the sparse shade beside the corral, sharing a meal of jerky and hardtack. Silver grazed contentedly on the small patch of scrubby grass near the water tank, his injured leg showing almost no sign of stiffness now. As they prepared to leave, the trading post door banged open and the three men emerged. They mounted their horses without looking in Wyatt and Najoni's direction, but the deliberate way they ignored the pair spoke volumes. "Which way do you think they're headed?" Najoni asked quietly as they watched the men ride off. "Same way we are," Wyatt replied grimly. "Toward Bitter Springs." They left Coyote Wash as the afternoon heat began to wane, pushing westward along the trail to Bitter Springs. Silver's strength continued to improve, allowing Wyatt and Najoni to alternate riding, though they kept the pace moderate. Neither mentioned the three men again, but Wyatt could sense that both of them were thinking about the encounter, gauging what it might mean for the days ahead. As the sun sank toward the horizon, painting the desert in fiery hues, Wyatt spotted a suitable place to make camp, a small arroyo with enough brush nearby for firewood. "We'll stop here," he decided. "No sense pushing Silver after such a good day." Najoni nodded in agreement, scanning the surrounding terrain with practiced eyes. "There is a spring nearby," she said, pointing to a cluster of greener vegetation about 100 yards from their position. "I can smell the water." Wyatt had noticed no such indication, but he'd learned to trust her senses. They made camp efficiently, the routine now familiar after their days together. Wyatt tended to Silver while Najoni gathered water from the spring she'd identified, a small, clear pool nestled among rocks, precious liquid seeping up from some hidden underground source. As darkness descended, they sat by their small fire, the warmth welcome against the rapidly cooling desert air. Silver grazed contentedly nearby, showing barely any sign of his near-fatal encounter with the rattlesnake. "One more day to Bitter Springs," Wyatt said, poking at the fire with a stick, "if we make good time." Najoni nodded, her expression thoughtful in the flickering light. "And then I find Sam and sort out whatever mess he's gotten himself into." Again, there was a mixture of affection and exasperation in Wyatt's voice. "And I continue on to my people's territory," Najoni added quietly. Something about her words caused a strange tightness in Wyatt's chest. The idea of their paths diverging shouldn't have bothered him. They'd only known each other a few days after all. But he found himself unexpectedly reluctant to think about it. "Where exactly are your people now?" he asked, realizing he didn't actually know her final destination. "North of Bitter Springs, in the shadow of the Dragoon Mountains. Those who escaped the reservation have gathered there in small bands." Her voice held a note of pride tinged with sorrow. "It is not much, but it is free." Wyatt nodded, understanding all she wasn't saying. The reservation system had been brutal for the Apache, forcing proud, nomadic people into confined spaces with inadequate resources. That some had chosen the dangerous path of escape rather than slow death was no surprise. "It's not safe, is it?" he asked, being off the reservation. "No," she admitted. "The army still sends patrols. But my people know those mountains better than any bluecoat ever will. They can survive there, at least for now." They fell silent, both contemplating the precarious existence of those who lived in the margins of a changing world. The fire crackled, sending sparks spiraling upward to join the stars. "Tell me about your brother," Nijoni said eventually, changing the subject. "You said he finds trouble easily. Has it always been so?" Wyatt chuckled despite himself. "Since he could walk. Sam was born restless, always looking for the next horizon, the next thrill." His expression softened with memory. "Our pa used to say Sam had ants in his britches and stars in his eyes, and you were the steady one." "I suppose so," Wyatt agreed. "Someone had to be after Ma died. Pa did his best, but he was gone a lot, working cattle drives, taking whatever jobs he could find. Left me to keep Sam in line." He paused, remembering. "Not that I did a very good job of it." "Brothers walk their own paths," Nijoni observed. "You cannot live his life for him." "No," Wyatt agreed, "but I can keep pulling him out of the fire when he gets too close to the flames. And that is what you will do in Bitter Springs. That's the plan." Wyatt's voice held determination, though even he recognized the weariness beneath it. How many times had he ridden to Sam's rescue over the years? How many more times would he need to? As if sensing his thoughts, Nijoni asked, "What will happen after? When you have saved him from these men?" Wyatt shrugged, poking at the fire again. "Same as always, I guess. I'll get him clear, maybe stake him to a fresh start somewhere else. Then I'll go back to my own life." "Which is?" The question caught him off guard. What was his life when he wasn't chasing after Sam or working odd jobs to earn enough to survive? "Drifting, mostly," he admitted. "Taking work where I can find it, ranch hand, scout, whatever pays. Me and Silver against the world." Nijoni's gaze was steady across the fire. "A lonely path." "I suppose it is," Wyatt acknowledged. He'd never thought of it that way, or rather, he'd deliberately avoided thinking of it that way. Loneliness was easier to bear when you convinced yourself it was freedom instead. "My grandmother says a life without connection is like a river that never reaches the sea," Nijoni said softly. "It may flow strong and swift, but in the end, it disappears into the sand, leaving nothing behind." The words struck Wyatt with unexpected force. Was that what his life amounted to? Water disappearing into sand? The thought was disquieting. "What about you?" he asked, deflecting. "What connections do you have waiting for you? Besides your grandmother, I mean." Something flickered in Nijoni's expression, a brief shadow of pain, quickly masked. "I was to be married once," she said. "Before the mission school, his name was Kesselgard, Swift Runner. He was killed by soldiers during a raid on our camp." "I'm sorry," Wyatt said, genuinely meaning it. "It was many seasons ago," she replied, though her eyes said otherwise. "The world turns, and we must turn with it." They fell silent again, each lost in private thoughts as the fire burned lower. Silver had settled nearby, his white coat almost luminous in the darkness. The horse's peaceful presence was a reminder of how much had changed in just a few days, how close they had come to losing him, and how that near tragedy had brought Wyatt and Nijoni together. "We should rest," Nijoni said eventually. "Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." Wyatt nodded, banking the fire for the night. As they prepared their simple bedrolls on opposite sides of the embers, he found himself wondering what would happen after Bitter Springs, after he'd dealt with Sam's problems and Nijoni had reunited with her people. The thought of returning to his solitary existence felt suddenly hollow, like a promise that had lost its appeal. They broke camp at dawn, packing their few belongings with practiced efficiency. Silver greeted the morning with a soft whinny, his injured leg showing almost no sign of weakness now. Wyatt examined the wound site carefully, marveling at how quickly it had healed under Nijoni's care. "Your medicine is remarkable," he said, running a hand along Silver's neck. 3 days ago, I thought I'd be burying him. Nijoni smiled slightly as she secured her bundle behind the saddle. The old ways have power, even in these changing times. My grandmother taught me well. Your grandmother sounds like quite a woman. She is the heart of our family, Nijoni replied, her voice warm with affection. When others lost hope after being forced from our traditional lands, she kept our stories and medicines alive. She reminded us that being Apache is not about where we live, but who we are. They mounted Silver together for the first time, Wyatt in the saddle with Nijoni riding behind him, her arms lightly circling his waist for balance. The arrangement was practical, allowing them to cover more ground while still giving Silver regular rest periods. But Wyatt found himself acutely aware of her presence, the light pressure of her hands at his sides, the occasional brush of her breath against his neck. The trail to Bitter Springs wound through increasingly rugged terrain, canyons slashed into the earth by ancient waters, rocky ridges that rose like the backbones of sleeping giants. Silver navigated the difficult path with sure-footed confidence, a testament to both his recovery and his natural agility. Around midday, as they paused to rest in the shade of a sandstone outcropping, Wyatt noticed Nijoni scanning the horizon with unusual intensity. "What is it?" he asked, following her gaze. "Dust," she replied, pointing to a faint smudge in the distance. "Riders, moving fast." Wyatt squinted, barely able to make out what she had spotted. "Could be anyone." "4 riders," Nijoni said with certainty, "coming from the direction of Bitter Springs." Her precision unnerved him. "You can tell that from here?" She gave him a look that was almost amused. "My people survived for centuries by reading the land and sky. 4 riders, heavy horses, riding hard." A sense of unease settled in Wyatt's gut. Few people had legitimate reasons to ride that hard in this desolate country. "Let's move into the rocks," he decided. "No sense advertising our presence until we know who they are." They led Silver deeper into the outcropping, finding a position that offered concealment while still allowing them to observe the trail. As they settled in to wait, Wyatt checked his revolver, a habit born of years living on the frontier. Nijoni watched his movements. "You expect trouble?" It wasn't a question, but Wyatt answered anyway. "Better to be prepared for it than surprised by it." The dust cloud grew closer, eventually resolving into 4 riders pushing their mounts at a punishing pace. As they drew near enough for details to become clear, Wyatt felt Nijoni tense beside him. "The men from the trading post," she said quietly. 3 of them, plus another. She was right. Wyatt recognized Rawlins, the scarred man who had confronted them, riding alongside his 2 companions from Coyote Wash. The 4th man was a stranger, younger, better dressed, with the look of a gambler rather than a frontiersman. "They're in a hurry," Wyatt murmured, watching as the group thundered past their hiding place without slowing. "Running from something," Nijoni observed, "or someone." The realization struck them both at the same time. The men were coming from Bitter Springs, where Wyatt's brother was in trouble. "Sam," Wyatt breathed, a cold feeling spreading through his chest. Those could be the men he owes money to. "Or men they hired," Nijoni suggested grimly. Wyatt's mind raced through the implications. If these men were connected to Sam's troubles and were now fleeing the area, it could mean anything. That they'd collected their debt, that negotiations had broken down, or worse, that they'd decided to settle matters permanently rather than wait for payment. "We need to get to Bitter Springs," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "Now." They emerged from their hiding place once the riders were well past, mounting Silver again with a new sense of purpose. Though Wyatt was desperate to push harder, he knew the stallion's recent injury meant they couldn't match the pace of the departing riders without risking a breakdown. "Silver can't gallop yet," Nijoni reminded him gently, sensing his impatience. "We will reach your brother." but we must be wise about our approach. Wyatt knew she was right, but the growing fear for Sam's safety made each mile feel endless. They pushed on through the afternoon, stopping only when absolutely necessary to rest Silver and drink sparingly from their canteens. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, the landscape changed subtly. More vegetation appeared, the soil took on a richer hue, and the distant smudge of green indicated the natural springs that gave Bitter Springs settlement its name and reason for existence. "We should reach town by nightfall," Wyatt estimated, relief and apprehension warring in his voice. Nijoni had been quiet for some time, her gaze frequently turning back the way they had come. Now she spoke, her voice low and serious. "We are being followed." Wyatt twisted in the saddle to look behind them. "You sure?" She nodded once, definitive. Since midday, they stayed just at the edge of sight, using the terrain for cover. 2 riders, moving carefully. "Could be anyone," Wyatt said, but without conviction. In this empty country, coincidences were rare. "Perhaps," Nijoni conceded. "But they match our pace and direction with too much precision for comfort." The knowledge added another layer of tension to their already urgent journey. Were these followers connected to the men who had passed them earlier, to Sam's troubles? Or was it something else entirely, perhaps related to Nijoni's status as an Apache away from the reservation? As they continued toward Bitter Springs, the sun sinking lower behind them, Wyatt found himself increasingly aware of how complicated their situation had become. What had started as a straightforward rescue mission, ride in, get Sam out of trouble, ride out, had transformed into something far more complex. Now there was Nijoni to consider, mysterious riders both ahead and behind, and Silver still not at full strength. "When we reach town," Wyatt said, planning aloud, "we should avoid the main street. There's a livery stable on the outskirts owned by a man named Fletcher. He's a fair sort. Won't ask too many questions, especially if I slip him a little extra." Nijoni nodded, understanding his concern for her safety in a frontier town likely to be hostile to Apache. And then? Night had fallen by the time they reached the outskirts of Bitter Springs, the settlement's scattered lights glimmering like fallen stars in the desert darkness. They approached cautiously, leaving the main trail to circle around to the eastern edge of town where Fletcher's livery stable stood, a large, weathered structure silhouetted against the indigo sky. A lantern burned in the stable window, casting a pool of yellow light onto the packed earth outside. Wyatt dismounted, helping Nijoni down before leading Silver toward the building. Their mysterious followers had remained distant, never closing the gap enough to reveal their identities, but Wyatt's neck still prickled with the sensation of being watched. Fletcher himself answered Wyatt's knock, a barrel-chested man with a gray-streaked beard and the perpetually stooped shoulders of someone who'd spent decades caring for large animals. "Holloway," he greeted Wyatt, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Been a spell since you passed through." "Fletcher," Wyatt returned with a nod. "Need stabling for my horse and someplace quiet to spend the night." Fletcher's gaze shifted to Nijoni, who stood slightly behind Wyatt, her face partially shadowed by the hood of her dress. His expression registered surprise, but to his credit, he made no comment. "Horse looks like he's been through something," the liveryman observed, noticing Silver's bandaged leg. "Rattlesnake bite," Wyatt explained briefly. "He's healing well, but needs rest and watching." Fletcher whistled low. "Lucky animal to survive that." He stepped back, gesturing them inside. "Got space in the back stall. As for sleeping, there's a tack room with some clean straw. Not fancy, but private." "That'll do," Wyatt said, relieved at the man's discretion. "What do I owe you?" They negotiated a price, with Wyatt adding extra as planned. Money changed hands, and Fletcher led Silver to a clean stall, promising fresh hay and water. "Town's been lively today," the liveryman remarked as he worked, his tone deliberately casual. Group of hard cases rode out hell for leather this afternoon, looking mighty pleased with themselves. Wyatt's stomach tightened. "Any idea what business they had here?" Fletcher shrugged, spreading fresh straw in Silver's stall. "Can't say for certain, but they spent time at the Broken Spur, that new saloon on the West End. Place has a reputation for high-stakes games." "Any trouble at the saloon?" Wyatt asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Not that I heard." Fletcher finished with Silver's stall and turned to face them fully. "Though there was talk of someone getting worked over pretty bad out behind the place last night. Doc Henderson treated him, I hear." Wyatt exchanged a glance with Najoni. The knot in his gut tightened further. "Sam Holloway been around?" he asked directly, knowing Fletcher would recognize the name of his brother. The liveryman's expression told Wyatt what he needed to know before the man even spoke. "That who you're looking for? Your brother?" Wyatt nodded. Fletcher sighed, running a hand through his beard. "He was in town, right enough. Been here maybe 2 weeks. Staying at the Pineview boarding house when he had money, sleeping rough when he didn't." He paused, seemingly weighing his words. "Haven't seen him since yesterday." "The man who got worked over behind the saloon," Najoni said quietly. "Was it him?" Fletcher's gaze shifted to her, surprised to hear her speak but respectful enough not to comment on it. "Can't say for certain, ma'am, but the timing fits." Wyatt felt a cold anger building inside him, tempered with worry. "Doc Henderson still keeps his practice above the apothecary." Fletcher nodded. "Same place, though at this hour he's likely at home, yellow house at the north end of town." "Thanks, Fletcher." Wyatt turned to Najoni. "Best you stay here with Silver. No," she interrupted firmly. "We go together." "Bitter Springs isn't kind to Apache," he warned, though he suspected she knew this well enough. "And you are not facing unknown dangers alone," she countered. "I can move through this town without being seen if necessary." Fletcher cleared his throat awkwardly. "Got some clothes hanging on the line out back, my daughter's. Left 'em when she moved to Tucson last year. Might help the lady blend in a bit more if you take my meaning." Wyatt looked at the liveryman with newfound appreciation. "That's mighty thoughtful, Fletcher." "Just practical," the older man replied with a shrug. "World's complicated enough without adding unnecessary troubles." 20 minutes later, Najoni emerged from the small room where she'd changed, now wearing a simple calico dress and shawl that would attract far less attention than her traditional clothing. She'd loosened her braids slightly and arranged her hair in a style more common among Mexican women in the territory. "Will this suffice?" she asked, a trace of discomfort in her voice at the unfamiliar garments. "You'll pass a casual glance," Wyatt assured her. "Just keep the shawl up around your face where you can." They left Silver in Fletcher's capable hands and slipped out into the night, skirting the main street as they made their way toward the north end of town. Bitter Springs was small by any standard. One main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a few scattered residences, the usual assortment of businesses that served a frontier community. But even at this late hour, the saloons were doing brisk business, raucous piano music and bursts of laughter spilling into the street. Doc Henderson first, Wyatt decided as they walked. If Sam was hurt bad enough to need treating, the doc will know where he is now. They found the yellow house without difficulty, a modest dwelling set back from the street, with a small sign beside the gate identifying it as the residence of J. Henderson, M.D. A lamp burned in the front window, suggesting the doctor was still awake. Wyatt approached the door with Najoni slightly behind him, her shawl pulled forward to shadow her features. He knocked firmly, aware that doctors in frontier towns were accustomed to being called upon at all hours. The door opened to reveal a thin, balding man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a perpetually harried expression. "Yes, what is it?" His gaze traveled from Wyatt to Nijoni, a slight frown creasing his forehead as he registered her presence. "Dr. Henderson," Wyatt said, removing his hat. "Name's Wyatt Holloway. I'm looking for my brother, Sam. Heard he might have needed your services recently." The doctor's expression shifted from irritation to wariness. "Holloway," he repeated. "Yes, I treated a Samuel Holloway 2 nights ago. Nasty business." "Is he alive?" Wyatt asked, the directness of the question betraying his fear. Henderson nodded. "He's alive. Barely. 2 broken ribs, fractured jaw, internal bleeding, the kind of beating meant to send a message." He studied Wyatt's face. "You look like him. Same eyes." "Where is he now?" Nijoni asked softly from beside Wyatt. The doctor's gaze shifted to her, his professional assessment taking in her disguise with a single glance, but making no comment. "I had him moved to the back room of my office above the apothecary. Wasn't safe to leave him at the boarding house." "Those men who did this to him," Wyatt pressed. "They rode out of town today." "4 of them," Henderson confirmed. "Rollins and his bunch. Hired muscle for a gambler named Donovan." He adjusted his spectacles. "Your brother owed a considerable sum. They collected, not in money but in blood and a signed deed to some mining claim up north." "A deed?" Wyatt frowned. "Sam doesn't own any mining claims." Henderson shrugged. "Whether it's worth anything or not, they seemed satisfied. Left him alive, at least." "We need to see him," Wyatt said. The doctor hesitated. "He's in bad shape, Mr. Holloway. Drifts in and out of consciousness." "Please," Nijoni interjected. "I have some knowledge of medicine. Perhaps I could help." Henderson's professional interest was piqued. "You a nurse?" "Of a sort," she replied cautiously. "Very well," he conceded after a moment. "Let me fetch my bag." 10 minutes later, they were climbing the back stairs to the doctor's office, Henderson leading the way with a lantern. The small room where Sam lay smelled of antiseptic and blood. In the dim light, Wyatt could make out his brother's form on a narrow cot, his face swollen almost beyond recognition, chest wrapped in tight bandages. "Sam," Wyatt whispered, moving to his brother's side. Sam's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then widening slightly in recognition. "Wyatt?" His voice was barely audible, distorted by his injured jaw. "How?" "Got your letter," Wyatt said, taking his brother's hand carefully. "Came as fast as I could." A weak smile cracked Sam's battered face. "Always. Cleaning up my messes." "What happened, Sam? What mining claim did you sign over to them?" Sam's eyes darted nervously to the doctor, then back to Wyatt. "Not here," he managed. "Not safe." Nijoni had moved to the other side of the cot, her trained eye assessing Sam's injuries. Without asking permission, she began unwrapping the bandages around his ribs, her touch gentle but confident. "What are you doing?" Henderson demanded, stepping forward. "His breathing is labored," she explained calmly. "The bindings are too tight and there is infection setting in." She glanced at Wyatt. "I need my medicines, the ones I used for Silver." Understanding immediately, Wyatt nodded. "Doc, I know this is unorthodox, but she saved my horse from a rattlesnake bite when no one else could have. Trust her with my brother's life, too." Henderson looked skeptical but stepped back, professional curiosity overriding his initial objections. "Very well, but I'll be observing." For the next hour, Nijoni worked with quiet efficiency, applying poultices to Sam's worst bruises, preparing a tea with herbs from her small medicine pouch, and rebinding his ribs to allow better breathing while still providing support. Sam drifted between consciousness and sleep, occasionally muttering fragmented words about the claim and someone named Red Fox. He needs rest now, Najoni finally said, wiping her hands on a cloth. The infection is beginning to recede, but his body has much healing to do. Henderson was watching her with undisguised interest. Where did you learn these techniques? That poultice. I've never seen anything reduce swelling so quickly. From my grandmother, she replied simply, and at the mission school in Fort Bowie. Before Henderson could inquire further, boots sounded on the stairs outside. Wyatt's hand moved to his gun as the door opened. But instead of danger, Fletcher the liveryman stood there slightly out of breath. "Thought I'd find you here," he panted. "Those men who were following you? They're in town, asking after an Apache woman and a man with a white horse." Wyatt and Najoni exchanged glances. "Any idea who they are?" Wyatt asked. "Army scouts," Fletcher replied grimly, "looking for escapees from the San Carlos reservation." Najoni's expression hardened. "They tracked me from the fort." "You need to go," Wyatt realized, the implications clear. If she were captured returning to her people, the consequences would be severe. "I cannot leave your brother," she protested. "The treatment has only begun." "I can follow your instructions," Henderson offered unexpectedly. "Your methods are unorthodox but clearly effective. I'm a quick study." Decision crystallized in Wyatt's mind. "Fletcher, is Silver fit to ride?" "That horse of yours is something special," the liveryman replied. "Legs almost completely healed. Never seen anything like it." "Then we leave now," Wyatt said, turning to Najoni. "I'm taking you to your people." Her eyes widened. "But your brother?" "Sam's in good hands," Wyatt insisted, glancing at Henderson, who nodded confirmation. "And this isn't just about getting you to safety. Those men who took Sam's mining claim, something doesn't add up." He looked down at his semi-conscious brother. "What's so special about this claim that they'd accept it as payment for a gambling debt?" "The Dragoon Mountains," Najoni said slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "The claim must be there, near my people's hideout." "Exactly," Wyatt agreed. "Those men aren't just debt collectors. They're using Sam's debt to get something more valuable." "Your brother mentioned Red Fox," Henderson interjected, in his feverish mutterings. "That name mean anything to you?" Najoni's face paled. "Red Fox is my grandfather, my grandmother's husband, a great chief among our people with knowledge of the mountains no white man possesses." The pieces fell into place with chilling clarity. "They're going to use the claim as an excuse to search for your people," Wyatt realized, "with army scouts already on your trail." "A trap," Najoni whispered. "We must warn them." Sam stirred on the cot, his swollen eyes finding Wyatt's. "Go," he managed. "Tried to warn you in letter. Didn't know. They were reading my mail." Wyatt squeezed his brother's hand. "Rest. I'll be back for you." Within the hour, they were riding out of Bitter Springs on Silver, the stallion moving with surprising strength despite his recent injury. Under the vast canopy of stars, they pushed north toward the dark silhouette of the Dragoon Mountains. "Your brother," Najoni said as they rode, her arms circling Wyatt's waist. "He tried to protect my people, didn't he? Even after being caught in this scheme." "Sounds like Sam," Wyatt replied, a mixture of pride and exasperation in his voice. "Heart's always been in the right place, even when his head isn't." They rode in silence for a time, the rhythm of Silver's hooves marking their passage across the desert floor. "What will you do?" Najoni asked eventually. "After we warn my people?" Wyatt considered the question, feeling the warmth of her presence against his back, recalling the steady way she had tended first to Silver, then to Sam. The thought of returning to his solitary existence seemed hollow now, like a path that led nowhere. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I'm thinking maybe that river doesn't have to disappear into the sand after all." Nijoni's arms tightened slightly around his waist, acknowledgement, perhaps understanding, possibly even hope. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, witnessing the journey of two people from different worlds, brought together by a snake's bite and a healer's remedy, now riding forward into an uncertain but shared future.